Morning everyone, my name's Mark Underwood, I'm Managing Director of Staffline, and I'm absolutely delighted that so many of you could come and join us today. You can see just some of the brands we've got in the room today. You can see why I'm so delighted that so many of you could turn out, because today's about enabling the future of work with your help. And what Staffline exists for is to make our customers more successful. So that's another big part of today. Making our customers more successful, how are we setting about that is, first of all, we're creating a much greater focus on becoming a much more customer-centric business, putting people and the customer experience right at the heart of what we do. And later on today, we'll be talking to you more about our customer experience management program. It's all in line with our vision to be the trusted market leader and provide a single destination for blue-collar workers to connect right across the UK. We are the UK's largest recruiter. Our compliance team check up to 6,000 new hires every week. In peak last year, we surpassed 60,000 workers for the first time, so one of the 50 largest workforces by size in the UK, certainly the largest flexible working. So that's why we feel that with your help, we're enabling the future of work, and today we've got some fantastic technology and some innovation that we've invested in that we want to share with you that will help us to ensure that we continue to make you more successful. The other thing that's really helping us at the moment is this continual change in thinking of millennials and new generations joining the jobs market that describe this desire for people to work flexibly. And we're seeing it at all levels of the jobs market, but particularly in blue-collar working, where people want to pick and choose when and where they work. And the days of people preferring to take permanent fixed-term contracts of employment seem to be becoming less relevant, with people, the newer generations to the jobs market, much more willing to pick and choose when and where they work and work flexibly. And that's something that is also really paying to our strengths, because we're able to balance those 60,000 odd vacancies across the country, moving people around to marry up people's desired shifts that they want to work against each of your clients' requirements. And then the more we extend our client base, we're able to move people around to complement one another. We've got about 50 of our biggest brands in the room today, which I'm delighted you could all join us. We've actually extended our customer base from what was 1,600 of the UK's best known brands to over 1,750 last year. So you can see the number of businesses now that are seeing that in the tightest labour market in some 40 years, the importance of having suppliers with size and scale to do the things that I've talked about. So part of making you more successful is giving you real insight into the labour market and some of the challenges and the opportunities. And last year we were delighted to have Kevin Green, the previous CEO of the REC, attend and talk to you about the labour market trends and policy and the likely impact of Brexit, whatever that might be. It might still be a topic today, by the way. We also then had Matthew Taylor come in and talk through his thoughts and his work for the Good Work plan that he did for the government. And we're really pleased to see that the government have adopted most of the principles of Matthew's Good Work plan. So I think it's important that throughout the course of today we give you more insights along that direction of travel of government policy, how we as Staffline and the REC and their members can help shape government policy and the good work that the REC are doing. So I thought it would be appropriate to invite Neil Carberry along. So Neil will talk to you shortly, and Neil joined the REC just over 12 months ago now, having worked in recruitment. So he spent 5 years earlier in his career as a headhunter. So he's done the job. He then went on to various roles. The most recent one before the REC was he was the managing director of the CBI. In his short period in office, he's already made real headway with trying to influence government in the direction of travel that we want as members them to be heading in. And he's also started to really refresh particularly the digital agenda of how the REC supports members like Staffline to continue to make you more informed and more successful. So enough from me. If you'd put your hands together and give a big warm welcome to Neil. Thank you.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. I want to talk about the changing face of our labour market. And we'll talk about some of the stuff that you all know and you're wrestling with every day: technological change, fast changing consumer expectations. But what I'll do from my seat is interpret a little bit of the other things that are coming down the track that might change the balance of some of those decisions, help you think about what you want to achieve in your business and your partnership with Staffline and others. So a bit of background. That's me. If you ever want to interact, I tweet at REC Neil. One of the things I had to do when I joined the REC is my previous Twitter pseudonym was a 20th century Italian communist. It was a complex joke from about 10 years ago that seemed funny at the time. Much more on brand now. My history, and Mark set it out, I've been the Chief Executive of the REC since June. I was a recruiter in the 1990s. I then went through a period working with FTSE business leaders of all sizes and sectors, particularly at the CBI, where I led all of the CBI's work on infrastructure, planning, employment, the labour market. And perhaps most relevant to some of this, I am a member of the Low Pay Commission, which still sets the national minimum wage, whatever politicians tell you, and the Council of ACAS, which looks after stewarding employee relations in the United Kingdom. This is the REC. We're a purpose-led, not-for-profit organisation. We are here to support brilliant recruitment done by brilliant recruiters. Why does brilliant recruitment matter? Because it helps your businesses grow and it opens opportunities for people to progress in their careers. And our bit of that at the REC is we champion good practice. So, our REC members are pass compliance test. We support them in raising the bar for the whole sector. We speak up for what recruiters do. We speak up for the successes of what is a £35 billion sector in the UK. And we help our members to succeed. So Mark mentioned our digital investment. That's all about helping recruiters deliver a better service to you. And that's a partnership that we've been investing in for a number of years. So what are we seeing from businesses right now? Well, one of the biggest trends that we've noticed is the difference between corporates' view of the wider economy and their confidence in their own business. These two lines come from one of our surveys. The dark blue line is when you ask employers, companies like yourselves, what they think the outlook is more broadly for the British economy. The other is what they think the outlook is for hiring plans in their business. And if you think about what we've been through over the last 2-3 months, that is a remarkably robust picture. Now, the patterns of hiring have changed over the last few months, but the truth is the labour market is still tight, is still creating jobs. Maybe the balance has changed. We are certainly seeing more interest in temp right now from the industry's clients. But actually, there is real potential, go back to Brexit, that this could be a blip associated with uncertainty rather than something deeper and more long term. So some of these trends that we'll go on to talk about might not be affected by Brexit if we find the right way through. Quick update on what our surveys are saying. So I referenced this a second ago. Permanent placements are marginally down in the last month. Temp placements, they are slowing, but are still up month on month. So the temp demand in the UK economy is still growing. Now think about where we've been in terms of the wider macroeconomic debate over the last few months. And yet we're still well into the positive here. So demand is still high. Vacancies, again, you see that slight drop off with all the uncertainty, still really high. We're nowhere near. You can see the big dip on this graph, which comes through the financial crisis and the recession in 2008-09. This is an entirely different world. Strong demand for labour, high levels of vacancies, maybe decisions not being made as quickly as they might have been because of uncertainty. And staff availability tightening. 80% of employers tell us they have little or no surplus workforce capacity right now for any increase in demand. So this is a tight labour market that maybe has some headwinds. Brexit, you look at some evidence of slowdown driven by China and Germany and France. You look at the US coming off the sugar rush of the Trump tax cut. There are some headwinds out there in the global economy, but actually the British labour market is really, really robust. The competition for people is going to remain strong. Which leads you to think about, well, what are the longer term trends that we need to think about when we're assessing how we plan for resourcing our operations? And there are 5 things here that I think are important. You talk about demographic change, changing consumer markets, changing customer behaviour, technological advance. Many of you will be thinking about that in your own businesses. An improving understanding of what drives productivity, going back to the video that we started with this morning. And then there's something really big about political and social expectations, which I want to explore, because you don't often hear it in a purely commercial business environment, but there's something coming down the track there that's well worth us spending some time on. So when I was doing these slides, my wife came over and looked over my shoulder and said, "Why have you got a graph on fertility in that presentation?" And I asked myself the question on the way out. But I think it is really important to make the point that plentiful supply of labour in the United Kingdom is not something that will be around for a long time. If you look at the right-hand graph there, that dark blue line is the growth of EU nationals working in the United Kingdom. In essence, it doesn't matter that we still have freedom of movement because they've stopped coming. Many of you will have seen that. And by the way, when people say, but that's been replaced by people coming from outside the EU, yeah, but they're typically coming on family reunion visas and not often working. The yellow line is non-EU nationals, and it flatlines. So you've got that lack of injection coming through from the EU, which we've had for the last 10 years. And then on the other side, you've got my graph about fertility. We are replacing the people on the left of that graph, the big hump, with the people on the right. There just are fewer British workers in the next decade than there have been in the past few decades. In fact, we talk a lot about millennials. We need to remember that millennials are approaching 40 now. There's another generation after that that's coming into the labour market. So in many ways, one of the things I'm talking to a lot with Staffline, with other businesses, is there's a candidate choice element coming into a lot of, coming much more strongly into, I should say, the staffing sector than we've seen before, because actually there is an awful lot of competition for talent, even right down to entry-level roles. Now, some of this we can mitigate by getting an immigration system right, and we're working hard with the Home Office to get a post-Brexit immigration system that works and keeps us open to labour from the EU and around the world. I've put on here what's in the white paper. You may have seen it. A single global immigration system, work permit based for people earning over £30,000 a year, and a 1 year, I put in inverted commas low skill because I don't like calling anyone low skill, visa for people coming in to fill labour shortages. There is a live debate about whether that's a 1 year visa or a 2 year visa, whether it's a work permit or it's a right for someone to come in. There will be something, but we don't know. Again, we don't know what the threat of the Night King is. We don't know what it looks like yet. And the truth of the matter is, automation, which is often seen as the answer, won't really save the day fully. It will do a bit of it, but if you look at the UK on this graph is about 4 along from the left-hand side. Analysis suggests that about 10% of jobs in the United Kingdom labour market might go with technological advance. The real challenge is the next 30%, which will be radically changed. And one of the things that we're encouraging all of our members to talk to clients about is, well, how are you retooling how labour input happens in your business? Increasing productivity from people, how are you reshaping jobs? So we talked about earlier on this Staffline video about productivity. Well, here's the productivity performance of the British economy. I'd say anemic, but that does anemia a disservice. The truth of the matter is that the pre-crisis trend on productivity in the UK, which is what funds everything, has not been maintained in any real way. So that process of job redesign is not only important to adapt to technology, it is important to get more per hour from the people that you have. And engagement is really important to that. Attraction, retention, not just measurement. So there's a big role for us as business to start articulating, well, what does work mean and how do we give people career development and grow our businesses in this new world? And people are starting to expand, to think about that. This is a piece of data that I unashamedly stole from my former employers at the CBI, but I've given them a sourcing, so it's fine. And you do see that people in different sectors are behaving differently. There is a trend towards changing how we advertise jobs, thinking more about training, little bit on increasing wages. What's not actually happening as much is the piece about non-wage benefits. So how can you change how you treat your workforce and how your partners on the staffing side are supporting their workforce to maintain retention and engagement and access productivity? Well, if I look at distribution there, to pick one, that's about 2% of distribution firms. But if you thought, if that could change your productivity by 0.5%, by 1%, it'd be enormous upside benefit. So there's some real opportunity there if we get this right. But what's important is none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? There are a lot of people out there who mistrust business, and they all have votes. Fundamentally, that's one of the reasons why the business voice as a whole was not persuasive in June 2016. And therefore, one of the reasons we've got to lead this debate is the debate is coming to us as well as us going to it. I've stolen the next couple of slides. I went kleptomaniac while I was doing these slides from Torsten Bell of the Resolution Foundation, who I've worked with for a number of years. But I think it makes the point about why people are where they are, why the Jeremy Corbyn focus, why the Good Work plan. You had Matthew here last year at this event. A society where people feel they have no control at work and don't know what is going on is more likely to lead to them feeling miserable and angry. Well, I think we'd all agree with that. Both May and Corbyn setting out to try and stake out ground on this in this place, and I'll talk a bit about where they both are in a moment. But why now? Because go to the monthly employment stats. We have the lowest unemployment that we have had basically ever. It's been growing for ages. Pay has recovered a little bit. So what's the driver of all this? And I think the point that I'd particularly push is this is not new. It's been building up for time. If you want to see what the experience of the average British worker has been over the last 10 years, remember that the bargaining power is coming towards them. There are fewer of them. This is a really good slide. This is every British recession back to the Great Recession. The one on the far left, you know, is the Great Depression. The one on the far right is the last decade. So the financial crisis was worse in GDP per capita terms than the Great Depression, and the recovery has been slower than every single recovery that we've seen since the 1930s. We've masked that because actually labour demand has been high. I saw a comment this morning from someone looking at a poll. One of the polling companies had published a poll about Brexit that said 70% of Conservative MPs thought that Brexit would be better for jobs than Remain, and 80% of Labour MPs thought Remain would be better for jobs than Brexit. Actually, it's not about jobs, it's about pay. That's what's happened to pay in the British labour market over the last 10 years. These are deciles from basically 59 in real terms. We are still not back to the British workforce income being at the level that it was in 2008. So where's this political pressure coming from? It's coming from the fact that these people are on the doorsteps talking to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. So there's a real sense that the agenda that you've seen come towards you from Taylor and otherwise actually is about, do I feel this economy is working for me? Don't talk to me about unemployment rates, talk to me about being able to take the kids out on a Saturday afternoon. So there's a challenge there, and again you come back to it's about engagement and progression and all of the things. when I was at the CBI, I often cast the difference between the CBI and the TUC as a difference of view about what the labour market is and does. If you're at the CBI, you believe the labour market is dynamic. That justifies having a conservatively set minimum wage, because people come into work and then they progress, they get skills, they move on, they build their lives, they build their careers. You know, fundamentally, we were capitalists. We hand the power to people to build what they do. If you're the TUC, you take the view that the labour market's static. People will always do what they do now. Now, if that is true, I don't think it is true, but if that is true, it justifies a higher level of government intervention in the labour market. And some of that is what you're seeing from Corbyn. And that's really playing out. So I said that, to the guys that I'd do a quick run through of the things that I think you should think about having on your agenda, because they're on the politician's agenda. So on the Conservative side, they are still the government. Who knows? The general view now is that some form of democratic event will need to take place at some stage within the next year to resolve where we are, whether that's a referendum or a general election. We're going to see tougher enforcement. We're already seeing that on national minimum wage. Now, you think about the era of austerity and government cutbacks, HMRC has 3 times as much resource for enforcing national minimum wage now than it did when the Tories came to power in 2010. So you're seeing a lot more inspection. There's some big challenges there. The guidance, I say this as a member of the Lope Commission, the guidance is not clear enough for employers. We are working hard at the REC on that and getting it to the right place. But assumptions, if people turn up at 6:07, they're 7 minutes late, we'll pay them from 6:15. You're not going to get away with it anymore. That kind of focus on enforcement will be rigid and will stay there. One of the things we're trying to do, actually, with my commissioner hat on, is force government to get focused on the guys who just aren't paying it at all, and there are some out there. We think about 23% of workers who are due the minimum wage don't get it, and they don't not get it because they're not paid for prep time. They don't get it because they don't get it. So getting some of that resource into the hard to find stuff is important, but we as a business community will be exposed if we're not making sure that we're compliant on the little things. We can help. We'll get simplicity into the guidance, but you can help yourselves by thinking about how do we stand this up if suddenly 5 HMRC inspectors turn up on our doorstep, especially if they're turning up to inspect lots of other things. There's another big debate out there about having a single labour inspectorate. That's maybe a few years away, but it's certainly there. Likewise, things like contractual status. You've seen some of the gig economy firms get dragged through the courts on employee status. One of the things I need to be kind of super clear on is the courts don't think there's any confusion in the British employment status test. They think it's clear. Now, in practice, of course, the guidance is terrible and it's not particularly clear. But making sure that in how you're working with your suppliers on the staffing side and how you're engaging your own staff, the days of the status being the one I write in the contract, they will have gone. And then last of all in this phase, I think the law is already beginning to change. And Mark mentioned earlier the process of putting the Good Work Plan into law. We are seeing new statement of terms and conditions coming on stream. We're doing a lot of work for REC members on how you get that right and keep it simple and make sure people understand it. Funnily enough, it's one of the areas where we can work most closely with the TUC, because what government officials think is a clear statement of terms and conditions for workers, the average worker doesn't think is a clear statement of terms and conditions. But there are also other things, new regulations on payroll companies that the government are working on, and importantly, if any of you are using the Swedish derogation from the agency worker rules, it's going to go. Have you thought about how you give it a humane death? Particularly, who actually is the comparator in your business? And what is your exposure? And have you talked to these guys about how you manage that? Because it's really important. In the longer term, there might be more from a future Conservative-led government. You know, we live in a populist age. Employment rights are really popular. Right to request a stable contract. Mentioned the single labour inspectorate. Further changes to the apprenticeship levy. Now, they could be good. We'd really, really love to ditch the apprenticeship off the levy and turn it into skills levy where you can just fund things that make sense to your business. There'll have to be a recognised framework or another. That's our big campaign for this quarter of the year. But they could go the other way. The levy fund is overspent. There is not a pile of money sitting in the DFE. They've used it all. And when governments have used the money up, their first answer is, well, can we get some more? The biggest risk is that actually the levy goes up and the skills system doesn't change. That's a big task for us. You know, my team at the REC, the CBI team, all of us working for business in Whitehall and Westminster to get right. Importantly, we are in the age of a political face-off on minimum wage rates. So next year, the minimum wage will get to 60% of median earnings, assuming we don't crash the economy. Again, there's the Night King. That will be about £8.65 in April 2020. Not £9.35, which is what George Osborne thought when he announced it back in 2015. So ironically, flip back to that slide about low pay growth. 60% of median earnings is a lower figure than people expected it to be at the time. But Philip Hammond has already given a commitment to raising it further. 67% is an obvious goal for any party to go for. It's the OECD definition of low pay. So if you have a minimum wage of 67% of income, you've eliminated low pay in some kind of odd, wonkish way from the British labour market. That'd be about $9.66 in next year's money. But then the question becomes by when? 2025, 2030. That debate is live. And this is from the Conservative Party. All of this is the Conservative agenda. The Labour agenda, well, who knows? They've talked about banning zero-hours contracts. Now, the one thing they then say is we banned them in Ireland and we banned them in New Zealand. No, they didn't. No one's actually banned zero-hours contracts. They banned things which are called zero-hours contracts, which are not what we would understand as zero-hours contracts. So one of the questions is, what do they really mean? Sectoral collective bargaining, that's a big TUC campaign. It comes up all the time. £10, £11 minimum wage, and pick your number when you're doing populist politics from the far left of the labour market. Statutory union rights, rights of access to your workplaces. All of that is on the Labour agenda. So there's and this comes from a place that says the British workplace is fundamentally unfair. I know you know that's not true. In fact, if you look at the only study that really measures this, it suggests that employee relations in Britain are great. Yeah, people are a bit annoyed, but they're annoyed because they haven't had a pay rise and they're looking for ways to progress. They're not annoyed with their employers. But we have to manage this populist push, and the way we do that is by demonstrating that what we do works. So, I mean, some conclusions from all this. The wider market and the demographic picture is driving a world where candidate choice is going to become more and more important, and deeper workforce planning for businesses is going to be a critical part of what you need to be thinking about, and particularly the integration of different parts of the labour supply into your business. Better for you to do it than have it handed down by a bunch of politicians, because they really don't understand your businesses. And in doing that, we can show how we make a difference. But it comes back to how we integrate business strategy, workforce strategy, staffing, and importantly, actually use it all to drive productivity, raise the performance of your businesses and create more wealth here in the UK, both for you to return to shareholders and for the workforce to prosper. As part of that, I'll just skip through these. The REC's goal is dead simple, right? We do 4 things. We show that good work and flexibility goes hand in hand, right? That is really difficult. Lots of people in the political debate think there's only one form of good job. It's a 9-to-5 directly employed permanent contract. Actually, if you look at the data, flexible workers are often much, much happier. Secondly, we need to demonstrate that what we do is at the heart of economic growth. And it is. Staffing businesses with the right people in the right way is absolutely critical. It's a £35 billion industry, and it's underpinning the growth of a large range of sectors. So really articulating what the future labour market means and why it works for the people who are being placed into your businesses and delivering great outcomes for your customers and supporting your numbers. That piece, more than anything, is important. The thing, it's a couple of years now since the 2017 general election, but the thing that struck me most about that whole general election campaign was how completely there wasn't an economic or business debate. We've got to get that back. And we do that by talking about what the future is and doing it with a bit of optimism. I'm going to call a halt there. The challenge that we have as an organisation at the RAC is just to celebrate what we do, because there's fantastic opportunities. Times will change, but we can get it right.
Thank you, Neil. I've got some questions for you, which are one of your first points on the priorities for the REC is around promoting the benefits of flexible working. And I talked about how people are now choosing to work more flexibly rather than have the traditional 9-to-5 permanent job. What more can we do then to give people the same sort of benefits and opportunities?
You saw a lot of copy earlier in the week in the media about the next generation after the millennials who have coined this term slashers. The Gen Z slashers, I do this slash that. I think it's about thinking about how the way they work affects people's lives. I'll give you a really good example of this that our sister federation in the Netherlands has done. In the Netherlands, you are more likely to get a mortgage if you're an agency worker than if you're a permanent employee today. Because if you think about, you go to the bank and get a mortgage. You get a mortgage based on a letter from your employer that says what you earn, what your salary is. So it's got some credit risk predictability because it's what you're earning now and it's what you've earned for the last few months, few years, whatever. Doesn't tell you anything about the future. Our sister federation went to the Dutch bank and said, hang on, we can do that for our temps, but we can also tell you consistently, because we can look at the client base and look at the skill demand, we can tell you what they will earn for the next 2-3 years when we do that. And the banks bought it. So today, Dutch agency workers have an easier transition into home ownership than agency workers anywhere else in Europe. And it's an idea that we're taking very seriously for what we need to represent the industry on here. And the proof of the pudding is in the fact that the default rates for agency workers are lower than the default rates for permanent employees. So that sense that, in some way working by an agency is insecure and less effective has been blown out of the water, and it's changed the nature of the labour market debate in Holland. Yeah, great. We've had some people work for us for years, so the fact that they can then get a mortgage would be brilliant. Okay, there's various points around national living wage, and there's one pretty close to me right now. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions on it. So we've got various clients in the room, one of which has breached national living wage because they had an annualised hours scheme, and they had no idea that they were doing anything wrong, but in any given week, people therefore hadn't reached national living wage. Something very similar with a seasonal banked hours scheme. And then, believe it or not, one of our clients who's not here today is contesting this, but they've been falling foul of national living wage because their employees joined a Christmas club, and because they're making a payment and they're on national living wage and making a payment into a Christmas club, and any given week their wages are falling behind national living wage. And then the bit that's close to me right now is that, as you know, because we've talked about it, Staffline have identified that we've got issues relating to some of our sites in the past where, particularly in food production environments, where the clocking in machine was after people had done the usual kind of wash your hands, put your robes on and then go into work. And that 1 or 2 minutes, up to 5 minutes in each instance, dating back over several years, can add up to be a lot of money. But more importantly, whilst we're hugely disappointed that we've fallen foul of national living wage in that, both the clients in question and ourselves at the time, it wasn't really a thing. This is like a moving goalpost that's become a retrospective issue, and the thought of somebody falling foul of it because they've got a Christmas club they've set up no doubt to aid worker retention. So my question really is, what more can we do, can the REC do to raise awareness on this topic? Because particularly as I know HMRC allegedly have got over 4,000 inquiries of this type ongoing, and if anybody in this room hasn't yet had this arrive in their business, it's coming, I can assure you. Yeah. So what can we do? So one of the things about this is that policy doesn't really move just because of fact, it moves because of story. And you need to be aware of the risk with national minimum wage, which is if someone can write a story that you're not paying national minimum wage, that's a pretty horrific story to be involved with. So the risks are high, and just elevating thinking about how you plan for compliance is really important. I view this as kind of two ends of a tunnel working towards each other. In terms of what we can do at the REC and other business organisations in talking to government, well, there's two big things. One, I'd much rather HMRC were kicking down doors in sweatshops in Leicester where people are being paid £1.50 an hour and enforcing that than going after someone who has a Christmas club. Right? First and foremost, let's get it clear what the national minimum wage is about. And we've been very clear with HMRC about that. And actually,
That's not what they're doing, is it?
Well, last week's report from the Low Pay Commission on non-compliance suggested 23% of people who are eligible for the minimum wage aren't getting it, and they aren't not getting it because they're in a Christmas club. So there's an enforcement challenge there, which is getting HMRC, who are doing what all enforcements do, they go for the low-hanging fruit. We'll come around and see one of you guys because you'll give us a cup of tea and a biscuit, and then we'll go through your papers, and you'll have papers for us to go through. It's a nice, easy life if you're an enforcement officer. So there's something about forcing them into the areas where they have to take action. The second bit then is making the guidance simpler. But once the guidance is simple, that's the other end of the tunnel, which is the minimum wage is the minimum wage. Compliance really matters. I think in the first decade, perhaps, of the minimum wage, we were in an experimental phase of, does this work? And actually, if you pay it, it's fine, because that's what we want. You paying it for the hourly rate. And if someone turns up at 6:07 and you only pay them from 6:15, well, they were late, and it's not a big thing. We've moved beyond that now, and maybe it's about that transactional nature of the labour market and people focusing, doing more than one job and focusing on their time. So I think inside, it's certainly inside Staffline and our members, but absolutely equally inside client businesses, a much clearer focus on how are we complying is going to be necessary.
Okay, and then final one then. Lots of those brands that are in the room today use just Staffline or Staffline and another. But there are still some that have got very fragmented supply chains. And the reality, both Matthew Taylor here last year and the JLAA refer to the risks associated with, I'm thinking modern slavery, as well as non-compliance with things like IR35 and, as you say, an unequal playing field. But it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's a tight labour market. So, whilst we're going to show some films in a second that show why we've got size and scale and how our technology investments are going to pay off to ensure we can maximise industry-leading fulfilment rates, I can see some thinking that people would say we better get one or two other suppliers in. But what would you say is the risks from your point of view of having a real multitude of agencies across the country?
So I'd take it back to kind of what the REC's conception of the industry is. If you think it's all just about filling that chair there with a human being of any nature to do a job today, then a kind of fragmented supply chain kind of works. If you think retention matters, if you think working with your partner to reshape how your production is developing and the kind of productivity goals that you might have as new technology comes on stream, I think that's a much more professional services relationship. And I say this as an ex-recruiter, so I'm allowed to say it. One of my big hairy goals for the REC is that the words which follow recruitment are not estate agent anymore. The words which follow recruitment are, law firms, accountancy firms like KPMG, where we are today. That sense that you're getting advisory capacity from your partners that help you really deal with some of these big issues, as well as, critical hurdle, still filling that chair there, but filling it with the right person at the right time with the right potential for development.
Thank you. Yeah, and just on that point then, before we close, we acquired a business last year which was Datum RPO, which some of the guys are in the room today. And part of their role is they look after spend for construction firms that use agencies right across the country to provide labour into infrastructure and construction and house building. And part of their role is they're neutral in the supply chain, so they go in and audit that large fragmented supply chain, and some of the stuff they're still finding is things that we thought we'd eradicated from the industry years ago, really basic stuff. So there are still real risks out there, so I think we've still got a job to do there.
Well, and I think I didn't put it in this presentation, but when I do a presentation on technological change inside the industry for a group of REC members, I point out that most recruitment consultants at the moment spend about 75% of their time doing tasks that are literally about getting people to where they need to be, and about 25% of the time doing the things that I think genuinely drive value, which are candidate attraction, candidate journey, and client understanding, because those are the things that drive advisory and actually help you get through a world where there are just fewer people in the labour market. So you want to make the jobs that you are offering at your client businesses more attractive, and of course that helps solve all sorts of issues around things like inclusion and activation of groups that are less well represented in the labour market as well.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.